thinking abstract, never backtrack. I was sweating but I'm talking down, but I'm past that. Days off, though the payoff, can't have that. Before we get to work, show me where the bag at.
Hey, vegan cyclists. So today on the RACECAST episode 5, we're going to do everything you need to know about training. And I've got with me my coach, friend, riding buddy, Tony Wolf. This guy has gone to school for a really long time. He's going to continue going to school for a really long time, learning everything you need to know about the science of training. I mean, dude, he knows it. So I'm going to ask him a ton of questions and hopefully answer your questions because, man, training in cycling is, there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much kind of just crazy, crazy ideas. So let's bust some myths. Let's talk about the science and answer some questions. So over the top, this is going to be laid over the top of whatever cool, awesome little training ride that I'm going to have here. But, man, I hope that you enjoy because this is going to be awesome. So, Tony, tell us who you are.
I'm Tony Wolf. I have a background in racing all things two wheels basically my whole life. I started out racing motocross for 18 years, raced professionally for about 9 years, and then made the transition to cycling. And I've been doing that since late 2011, I guess. I kind of started out, and I'm racing Category 1 now, and yeah, have a master's degree in exercise physiology, exercise science, and am getting ready to start my doctorate degree in that field as well.
So having a PhD, you're going to be a doctor in what? In training for cycling? Or is this just like, is it broad? Is it everything sports, not just cycling?
Yeah, it's exercise physiology, which really entails a lot. But basically, exercise physiology is the study of acute and chronic adaptations to exercise. So how your body responds, how it's affected by exercise, and how it adapts to exercise over time.
So how much schooling have you had to this point to learn what you know?
I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science and a master's degree. So, 4 years degree for the bachelor's degree, and then 2 years for the master's degree, and then the PhD will be 3 to 4 years.
That's so much school, bro. Man, that's so. Is this something that you knew you wanted to do? Like, why get into this?
No, my whole life really growing up, I wanted to be a pro motocross racer. That was it. That was my 100% my vision. And I really didn't have any other vision for my life outside of that. And when I was 20 years old, I broke my back in 7 places. So that was in 2006, late 2006. And yeah, I had a 3-level fusion in my thoracic spine, and kind of when that happened, I was like, man, I got to figure out something else for my life. I can't do this for the rest of my life, and really didn't think I was going to race ever again. And so during that time, I kind of just thought a lot about what I wanted to do, and I knew that I needed to do school, or for me that was kind of the path that I was going to end up taking. I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and I guess I kind of thought about going into physical therapy. That was a major consideration. That was almost what I did, but through the rehabilitation process, after I broke my back, I kind of really fell in love with exercise. The physical effects of it, as well as the mental benefits and emotional, because it was a really hard time that I went through, and exercise was kind of what helped me kind of bring me out of it. And just then I started to study exercise science and just fully fell in love with it, and decided that was kind of, I wanted to continue my education in that and teach it to people, because I love talking about it. So whenever I can sit down with somebody or get somebody to listen to me talk about it, it's exciting to me. So I was like, I should teach this stuff.
So what is the craziest thing you've learned so far about physical science? Like, if there's one thing that you've learned that you were like, wow, I didn't know the body did that, or something that just kind of blew you away.
I mean, there's so much. The body is amazing, but I'd say the one thing that stands out the most probably was like a moment or like time in my undergraduate studies, and it was actually just a physiology class, like a basic physiology class, and it was just learning about the propagation of nerve impulses, and just, you know, you learn the entire physiological process of a nerve impulse, and it's incredible how many steps there are to that process that happens countless times per second throughout our entire body. And it's really just incredible that the body is so efficient in making those things happen over and over and over without our even thinking about it. And just, yeah, the like, in order for me to explain the propagation of a nerve impulse to you would take, you know, a long time, but it happens so rapidly, so many times per second, and it's incredible.
All right, so we're going to get really into like structured training programs for cycling and dive into your knowledge base and how that applies. But something that I sort of have had some, maybe, I don't know, disagreement with, or have seen a lot of people comment, is the difference between genetics versus just sheer will, right? And how some people think, well, Mark Cavendish could be the best time trialist in the world if he wanted to be, and Bradley Wiggins could be the best sprinter in the world if he wanted to be, that they just don't want to do those things, and they just like doing the things they do, and it has nothing to do with genetics. What is the science, or what is your take as an educated person on genetics, on how much that plays? Like, was Mark Cavendish born to be a sprinter? Like, no matter what, he just, like, his body was specifically tuned for this, and then since now he's training to exploit those maybe advantages that he has via genetics? Or is it just you could do whatever you want just based on training?
In order to be the best at their level, the level that they're competing at, it's very highly genetically based, and a big part of that is muscle fiber composition. So you have fast twitch muscle fibers, which are like your high strength and power producing muscle fibers, and you have slow twitch muscle fibers, which are more like, I guess you'd say, you know, endurance based kind of, you know, they're more aerobic, whereas the fast twitch are more anaerobic. And the fibers on each far end of the spectrum, they can't move very far. So you can't turn a fiber that's very, very fast twitch into a slow twitch fiber. And there's a spectrum, so you're not either fast twitch or slow twitch. But if you have fibers on the far end of the fast twitch spectrum, you can't turn them into slow twitch fibers. So if you have somebody who's born largely, you know, that have a larger proportion of fast twitch muscle fibers, which there's a lot of things that determine what type of fiber a muscle fiber is, which including like neuromuscular characteristics and enzymatic characteristics and all kinds of things. But if you have somebody who's largely fast twitch genetically, then they're going to be better suited to be like a sprinter. And so, I mean, like, ideally, you know, we would get like a muscle biopsy when we're like a baby and find out, you know, genetically kind of how we're made up and be able to like specialize from a young age, you know, just like know what we're supposed to do. And some people are fortunate enough to kind of get thrown into what their body is suited for, and then some people like myself end up being a motocross racer and a cyclist. You know, 6'6" and 205 pounds, not really built to be an endurance athlete, but so training goes a long way, and the willpower. You know, I work really hard to do what I do, but I could never be Bradley Wiggins or Mark Cavendish. I'm just not genetically built to be either of those things.
But so like on average, if you were going to do a bell curve, most people are probably 50-50 fast to slow. And then you have this spectrum of where people start to go more 70-30, 80-20 in one way or the other, which would then give them a huge advantage at that pro level, but maybe at at the amateur level, the discrepancy in fitness is so vast that you could be a sprinter with slow twitch, just because, you know, there's not as much room to move as of where when you start to be, it's the best of the best of the best. You know, you're winning by a fraction of a second. If you have a genetic makeup that is more suited for fast twitch, and you've both trained just as hard, right? So is that kind of frustrating? I feel it's frustrating. If I train just as hard as someone else and we go sprinting, but he has more fast twitch just because he was born that way and he's going to beat me. You, for instance, you're going to beat me in a sprint every single time. That's frustrating. But, you know, I mean, is there a way for me to train past my genetics? Is there, like, how would you overcome if you just maybe don't have fast twitch, or, you know?
Dope.
Just dope. But I mean, even at that,
I'm not condoning doping, by the way, just
but even with that, right? I mean, even with that, you're gonna run into times where people just genetically have an advantage. And so, you know, they say, right, like talent loses when it refuses to work hard or whatever like that. But when talent works hard, then it's like unbeatable, right? And that's where you get Peter Sagan and Mark Cavendish and these guys that are already, they're so gifted naturally, and then they exploit the best of it. But so, as an amateur, like what would you suggest someone, how does someone, here's a good question, how does someone find where they fit? And is there such a thing as a Cat 5 sprinter?
I mean, you definitely have guys who are obviously more inclined to be a sprinter, even at Cat 5, you know. So, I mean, like, myself, for instance, when I was a Cat 5, you know, I have a decent sprint. So at the, you know, Pro 1-2 level, I'm not a sprinter. You know, I have an okay sprint, but I'm definitely not a sprinter. As a Cat 5, you know, I had a good enough motor and a strong enough sprint that, you know, I was a Cat 5 sprinter. But, you know, you get to higher levels, there, like you said, the discrepancy becomes, as you get to a higher level, the discrepancy becomes smaller. And so, sorry, what was the question exactly? So
yeah, just so how does someone find out what they are?
So, yeah, I mean, there are like certain tests that can be done and stuff. You know, I mean, they all require like some equipment. Like we have it in the lab at Fresno State and stuff. So I mean, there is certain equipment that you can use and like certain tests you can do to kind of give a good idea. Really easy way like to find out if you're more fast twitch or slow twitch is like just a standing long jump test is actually a really good indicator. So if you have a really good standing long jump, you're more fast twitch likely.
What is a standing long jump?
So you're just standing still and you jump as far out as you can. You know, with like a counter movement, like you use your arms and just jump as far as you can. And so that gives a pretty good idea of how much explosive power a person has. And if a person has a lot of explosive power, then they probably have a high percentage of fast twitch fibers. And then there's other, you know, you can do a muscle biopsy, which is more invasive and, you know, requires, you know, you have to see a doctor for that and stuff. And then there's a Thorson's test is what it's called, which is kind of, you like sit on you basically do like a repeated knee extension. You're sitting in like a chair and you're doing a knee extension against resistance, and you produce as much power with every knee extension for a minute. And there's like a curve at the end. You get a power curve, And for somebody, if they start out with a lot of power at the beginning and their power drops across the minute a lot, then they're kind of a more fast twitch person, because they have a lot of power for a short period of time, but then more fatigue. Whereas I actually did a Thorstensen's test maybe like 2 years ago, and it was not a big decay in the curve, so which actually indicated I was more slow twitch, which, like, I think for myself, I had a decent sprint as like a Cat 5, but I think that I'm kind of like in the middle of the spectrum, kind of like genetically, and so I've worked really hard to train more of like an aerobic motor, and so I think that the training that I've done has kind of shifted me more towards whereas I might have been kind of intermediate in the spectrum. I think I've kind of shifted towards this slow twitch.
But you can only shift that so much.
Yeah, you can't go from one end of the spectrum to the other completely. But you do have, like I was saying before, you have the very slow twitch fibers, and you have the very fast twitch fibers, and you have like intermediate fibers. And those intermediate fibers are pretty adaptable. They can you can shift them pretty well one way or the other. So
okay, but so everyone's familiar with like train your weaknesses. If you're really strong in one area, you should train to build up your weaknesses to be overall well-rounded. But is that a good way to do it in cycling? If you are just naturally gifted in slow twitch and you can hold high amount of power for a long time versus hitting these really like spikes, should you just forget about sprint training and just like dive head into and structure your whole program to what your body, your genetics are suited for?
Well, cycling is such a dynamic sport. I think it is important to train like all the energy systems, and to make sure that you are kind of touching all those bases. But it's definitely, you have some people who are built, they're just a climber, 135 pounds, skinny legs, like you're never going to be a sprinter. And that's not to say that you can't improve your explosive power to some extent, but you're never going to win a sprint. And so, the best you can hope in that case is that maybe, you can train yourself to be a really good climber or breakaway rider, and that, out of a breakaway with other like riders, you can out-sprint them. But, putting a lot of focus to change yourself as a rider, if you're genetically, just naturally like a climber, to try to be a sprinter is, it's not going to be very effective. So I think while it is important to work on the explosive power and work on that high end stuff, especially in cycling. Even if you're not sprinting, even if you're not trying to win a pack sprint, there's so many accelerations and surges, and even just attacking to get into a breakaway requires, big surges in power. And so, yeah, you do need to train all of those energy systems. So you don't want to forget or ignore anything. But, it's definitely important to train your strengths just as much as to train your weaknesses.
So is there a downside to having a beginner cyclist, Cat 5, maybe hasn't even raced yet, classifying themselves as a climber, as a sprinter, as a breakaway? Because you haven't even really been able to test yourself yet, right? Just because you're light or just because you're big doesn't necessarily maybe mean, right? So classifying yourself and then saying, well, I'm going to sit in because I'm a sprinter. And if they haven't even really started racing, or they're very early on in that experience, like, is that a danger to?
I think that's especially the case for sprinters, because there are a lot of people like at the Cat 5, 4 level that are like, yeah, I'm a sprinter. They're strong, they have a fast sprint, but again, when you get to the higher levels, the actual sprinters, man, they're fast. So I think for in that case, yeah, like it's don't like pigeonhole yourself. I think, try to do breakaways, and even, as a Cat 5 myself, I knew that I could win sprints, and I did. And then other races I went ahead and broke away like 5 minutes in, and I had one race as a Cat 5 where me and one other guy ended up lapping the field, and And I mean, I only had to out sprint one guy. So, I mean, I think that for sure, especially at the Cat 5 level, it's like try different things because winning doesn't matter. But I mean, you have some guys who they are 130 pounds, and it's like, I mean, they're for sure not ever going to be a sprinter. You have some bigger guys who might just be able to have a big motor and be like a good breakaway rider. But you have those little guys that it's like, don't say that you're just going to be a climber. Like, you can still be a breakaway rider, but you're probably never going to be a sprinter. But again, you can improve your sprint so that you have a better chance out of a breakaway or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that anybody should just try to classify themselves right from the start. But sometimes you do have Cat 5 guys or guys who haven't even raced yet who, they come out on a group ride and start dropping Cat 2s on climbs. It's like, well, that dude's a climber. We need to get him into some climbing races. That does happen. But so in that case, it's like, yeah, you probably can classify yourself, and you'll probably be a Cat 1 in 6 months.
So let's jump into training. In 140 characters or less, how does training work? I mean, what is happening when you go out and you suffer and you push the pedals hard? What happens to your body that then a week later you can push those pedals harder? I know that's like 10 years of schooling into one thing, but like just what is actually going on that makes your body improve?
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, you have changes in enzymatic activity. You have changes in your muscle hypertrophy and increase the number of muscle fibers. So hyperplasia. You have increased plasma volume, which is you have two components of your blood. You have the red blood cells, and then you have your blood plasma. And actually, I mean, you have an increase in plasma and red blood cells. So you have just an increase in blood volume, which allows you, of course, to deliver more oxygen. And I mean, you have changes neuromuscularly. So your nervous system changes. And I mean, amazingly, like one of the coolest things too, and this is separate from training for competition or whatever, but it actually, exercise improves brain function. And so, I mean, like, science has shown that if you exercise, get a little bit of aerobic exercise, and then you go supplement that afterwards with learning, like reading or doing something to learn, you learn better. Your focus is better, your concentration is better, and you remember things better. And
so when I'm listening to podcasts while suffering, is that like, or am I too hypoxic to remember? I mean,
so you actually have smaller percentage of your total blood going to your brain during exercise, but after exercise you have an increase in brain blood flow. So it's better, you learn more by listening to the podcast afterward. But then it also depends on how hard you're riding. So if you're riding really hard, then yeah, I mean, you're having more blood going to your legs instead of your brain. But yeah, I mean, the aerobic exercise releases a hormone, I think it's a hormone. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And basically that stimulates the production of brain cells, of new neurons. So after exercise, your brain is creating new brain cells, and then by supplementing that with learning, you create new connections between those neurons. So you actually create new networks within your brain. So you remember things.
Dang, that's awesome. I mean, that's like that's something you wouldn't think, right? That when you're getting stronger, you're improving your physical form, that you'd be improving your mental form as well.
But it's important to note that you do have to, like, just exercise doesn't make you smarter. You have to, like, read or listen to a podcast. You have to do something to learn, to create those neural connections.
Okay, but so is true or false? I'm only making adaptations, I'm only getting stronger when I'm going as hard as I possibly can.
No, not at all. I mean, really, there's a lot of different adaptations that occur due to training, and so there's certain things that happen when you are going as hard as you can, but there are other things that don't happen when you're going all out. So, I mean, it depends on what the goal is of the workout. You know, what adaptations you're trying to create. That you base how hard you're going to ride on what adaptations you're trying to create. Or I mean, at least if you want to have like a very structured training program, that's the way to do it. Like you have different periods within your training program to where you're focusing on different things, and you base the intensity of your workout on those adaptations that you're trying to achieve.
So going really hard and then going really easy, if that was just your base structure, right, you're going to be missing out on a lot. Or I mean, it's like, does that help someone? And I mean, I guess this kind of gets us into a whole nother big topic, but training structure benefits for an elite cyclist, an advanced cyclist, someone who's been riding a long time, versus someone who's just started, right? I mean, having structures all the way down to you need to be at 120% of your FTP for 5.5 minutes with 2.5 minute rest period because the lactic acid. When you start to really get into the science of it, are you going to get the same benefits as an elite cyclist as a beginner cyclist, or is that beginner cyclist, is he going to benefit from just go hard Monday, go easy Tuesday?
I think, I mean, and it depends like on just how beginner the cyclist is. Like if they're just starting out, I mean, I think at the beginning it's like just get out on your bike and ride and just start getting some miles, and then you can go harder and harder, and then I mean, I think right from the gun, intervals like shouldn't even. I think the most important thing actually is to learn to enjoy the bike and just love getting out there and riding. But yeah, as you become more fit, then the structure becomes more important, because you hear like Team Sky talk about marginal gains. As you get closer to like your peak fitness, it becomes harder to make those gains, and they do become marginal. And so having a very structured training program becomes increasingly important. But for sure, I mean, even somebody who's been riding for maybe a year or two or however long, if they've been riding for a while and kind of consistent and stuff, getting onto a training program is definitely beneficial. And a big thing too is just, I mean, I know for myself and some other people, just having like a goal for your ride. Like, so if you just have the idea that you're wanting to get faster and so you need to go out and ride your bike, sometimes it's hard to get on the bike, just like, I need to ride. But if you have a goal in mind, like I need to ride for this reason, like I have this workout to do.
Well, I remember maybe 2 years ago, your program it went 8, 10, 12 hours, right? 8, 10, 12, 8, 10, 12, 8, 10, 12. And we were talking about how gratifying that was to look at that on Strava, and see this like really patterned structure. I did 8, I did 10, I did 12.
Yeah. And
you didn't want to ruin that. You didn't want to ruin that graph, right? And you were saying like it ends up looking like a hillbilly's, teeth, right? All just big and small and like all over the place. And just this visual input of, man, I like the way this looks really nice and neat. Maybe that's kind of OCD, but it helps you, like whatever. Motivation, right, is it can be such a small spark, and whatever that is, to get out on the bike and go, I just don't want to mess up my Strava graph. Mm-hmm. If that gets you out on the road, then sweet, right? And so having anything written down, have any sort of plan is awesome. But so at what point do you start to have to go, okay, let's make a shift from a basic just I ride Monday, Wednesday, Friday to let's periodize this, let's make this training blocks, let's introduce data into this, power meter, heart rate, cadence, that sort of thing. Because you see guys, I've seen guys that have been riding for 20 years. And at the beginning of that 20 years and at the end of that 20 years, it's just flatline, right? It's up and down sometimes, but it's just like random almost how they feel, right? And it's like, man, that person has no structure, and you can see that they've never really gained. But so at what point do you realize, maybe is there a metric of your fitness? I'm this strong, or I've been riding this long, or I want to achieve this, that you start to go, okay, I got to take training more seriously?
I don't think so. I think it really depends on the person. I have a client right now who he's wanting to get started racing, and he was certain, like before I started working with him, and he didn't tell me this before I started working with him, he told me after I've been coaching him for a month or two at that time, but he told me, he's like, man, I was sure that I was like plateaued, like that I wasn't going to get any better. And since you've been coaching, like he's gotten, way better. Like in just a few months' time, he saw major improvements. And so for him, it was just kind of, and he had a power meter and stuff, but he didn't really know how to use it that much. So for him, it was just like he didn't know like where to, what to do to improve his training, to get stronger, to improve from where he was at. And so, I mean, some people kind of take it upon themselves, and they read a bit, and they kind of learn a bit about structure and training and stuff, and they can kind of get a little bit further. And then some people just, would rather kind of like, tell me what to do. Like, I just want to get fast, and they just don't really. But like I said, for him, he hasn't even started racing yet, but he had felt like he had plateaued, and then getting onto like a structured training program. And his structure isn't as crazy as, some people's might be, like somebody who, like yours even, or like anybody who was coaching, if they were Cat 1 or 2 or maybe even 3, his training isn't that structured, but it's structured enough that he's seen major improvements. But anyway, that's all to say that it just depends on the person, I think. It's just some people do better sooner with the coaching, I think, or the structured training program, and other people kind of take longer before they see that plateau, I guess.
But you can get into a burnout. If you, say, started cycling 6 months in, you get into a structured training program, all you do is look at power and data, and you forget to learn to love the ride.
Yeah.
Then it doesn't matter how you, right? It's not how you start, it's how you finish. And man, to get burnt out in a year or two with structured programs is definitely a thing. And so how do you structure in no structure?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely need to have periods where you kind of back off from the structure a little bit. And I mean, your body and brain need time to recover from all the training and racing and stuff. And so, I mean, you have to like structure in, like you said, kind of structure in those periods of no structure to just go out and ride and have fun, or not even ride if you don't feel like it, And I mean, for me, this off season, man, I took a good period of time where I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna ride if I feel like it, and I'm not going to if I don't, and I mean, that's after years of training. So definitely, like, you don't want to get too structured too early on. And like you said, it's important to learn to love the ride first, and then like the motivation to have the structure should come from just wanting to improve yourself, and then that's a big motivator, right? It's like you start to see the improvements, and then maybe you've been training kind of unstructured, and you stop seeing as many improvements, and you want to keep seeing those improvements, so you build in that structure, and it's so gratifying to see, to feel yourself improve and see improved race results and stuff like that. And so that gratification kind of makes the structure feel good. But
all right, but so let's talk about subjective versus objective, right? Which is data. When I remember when I first started riding, I had this loop. It was out to Friant Hill and back. And it had stop signs and traffic, and it was not like controlled by any means. But that I would just gauge that time. The first time I did it was an hour and 40 minutes. The second time I did it, hour and 37, right? And I had something to sort of gauge, even though that was wildly not consistent. But so if you want to really see improvement, or because just by feel, I felt really good today. Well, that has no bearing on your program, because there's times where I've felt the worst, but I'm putting out my best power, right? And so let's talk about the hierarchy of that data: speed, cadence, heart rate, power, all of it. I mean, what, as someone progresses, what do they, and obviously those get more and more expensive as you go up, and a power meter is a huge investment. But how important is data to a structured program?
I mean, if you want to have a very structured program, it's essential. It not only helps you gauge the intensity of your workout, but it also helps you track progress, and also kind of look at fatigue. Like, so if you're not performing as expected, then maybe you're getting into like the non-functional overreaching kind of area, or getting close to overtraining, and that's not good. So it's really helpful to gauge all of those things, and I mean, power meter is the top. That's, I mean, to have the best structure possible, the power meter is like essential, pretty much. I mean, for me, it's like riding without a power meter feels like, what am I doing? Am I pedaling? And some people don't like that, because you have to, you sometimes get into the mode where you feel like you have to focus on your power so much, and I started out that way for a while. I was very like just eyes on the power all the time, like Chris Froome status, and I've gotten a lot better now at just kind of not doing that, enjoying the ride a lot more often, and then using the power when it's really important. But yeah, I mean, so power is essential to all those things I listed before, gauging your intensity and looking at fatigue and progress. Because using heart rate, you can't measure progress, because your threshold heart rate doesn't change. Your threshold power changes. So as your threshold improves, your power becomes higher, but your heart rate stays the same. And so you can't really gauge improvement with heart rate.
Could you gauge it with speed? At 20 miles an hour, I used to be 180 beats per minute, and now I'm 160 beats per minute? Or is it just too inconsistent?
Yeah, I mean, it's so, the speed is so dependent on so many things, like the wind and the road, and even how cold or warm it is out. The air affects how fast you're going, and if you're going up a slight incline on the road, or so I mean, it's dependent on so many things. It's so variable. And I mean, you can look at kind of like, I guess, your average speed over a lot of, like, over days, or like across a week or whatever, and be like, yeah, my average speed has increased while the heart rate has been about the same. You could potentially do that, but it's way less effective than using power.
Is this a stair-step thing where I get speed and cadence, then I get a heart rate, and I don't need speed and cadence really anymore to gauge, and then once I get a power meter, I don't need heart rate anymore? Or would you ultimately want to incorporate all of the metrics?
I think it's best to incorporate all of them. I mean, for sure. So like I was saying before, being able to look at your power versus your heart rate, so, okay, I'm riding at threshold heart rate today, and my power is up 20 watts. So I'm having a really good day, or I'm improving. But if that's a trend over time, then that's progress, And so being able to use those things, and there's other, it's kind of something you and I had talked about before. There's ways that you can use both in your training too, where you keep your heart rate within a certain range, and then kind of, as long as your power isn't, if you're not like in zone 2 power, you're doing threshold intervals and your heart rate's at threshold, but you're at zone 2 power, then you're probably fatigued and you should pull the plug on the ride. And so that's a good way to use both of them, like to gauge, how your body is responding and if it needs rest, but then also just being able to like keep it in that zone and worry a little less about the power, as long as your power is kind of in the expected range, because if zone 4 it's a large range of wattage, and so if your heart rate is in that zone 4, or if you're trying to say 170 to 175 beats per minute, and then your heart rate is staying within that or your power is staying within that expected zone, then you know that you're going to be getting the adaptations to that training, that bout of training that are expected.
Well, and that's having, like you said, trending is such an awesome way to, one, motivate yourself, because there's in 2016 I had no success racing, right? And without having a power meter, and without being able to know that I hit my best 20-minute power by a significant amount, my reflection on that year would have been, this is shit. This is a horrible year, right? And just because I didn't necessarily perform that great in some of the races or whatever, I did make improvements. And so to have a myriad of goals to say, well, my goal would be I want to win a race. Another goal was I wanted to hit 350 for 20 minutes. Another goal was to do like 40 races. And obviously some of those goals I don't achieve, but to have more ability to set goals like the power, right? That gives you at least something to look back on and be like, cool. And then you can, and I've done videos about this, but you can gauge a proper educated forecast of the future, right? So when you set a goal, I want to do 400 watts for 20 minutes. Well, how pie in the sky is that, right? If you're currently doing 200 watts for 20 minutes, you're not going to be able to do that next year, right? So you're going to have to bring that goal down at least somewhat manageable. And so let's kind of talk about, I want to talk about how quickly you can make adaptations, and then let's talk about zones, because you talk about zones. Some people have no clue what a zone is. But so how much progression in a year could someone expect on their FTP, like a % increase on their FTP, if they did the perfect program, 100% effective program, their entire life was dedicated to training? What is the spectrum of improvement?
I get that question sometimes, like people like, what percentage can I expect with this training program? I don't like to even try to put a number on that. It's so dependent. It depends on so many things. Everybody's different, and some people adapt to training quicker and easier than other people do, and some people. Someone might be on a good training program for a year and make a lot less adaptations than another person. And the second year, maybe all of a sudden they see a big spike, whereas somebody else might see a big spike in the first year and not so much in the second year. It really varies a lot, and it also varies so much on not only the training program, but your lifestyle, your nutrition, your sleep habits, how much stress you have in your life outside of training, because training is like an accumulation of stress on your body, and that's why you need the recovery weeks and the recovery days and stuff, is because you're stressing your body, and you have other stressors in life, work, family, whatever else, that all those stressors accumulate and they fatigue your body, and so it's for somebody who has way less stress. Maybe they're just riding, and maybe their nutrition is perfect and their sleep is on point, and they have all those things dialed that they might see bigger changes than somebody else. But again, it's just it varies. It depends on so many things that it's hard to say like how much you could really expect to improve.
But it's like, let's say you could not improve by 30%. Like, what is the ceiling of just, like, for sure, doesn't matter what you're doing, you're gonna, like...
Well, again, so there's another big variable factor is the current train state of the person. Like, if they're starting out from basically nothing, then 30% is probably will happen, you know, maybe more. Whereas if you have somebody who's been training for a few years, yeah, no, you're not going to see it.
Because training's not linear, so you couldn't say, and this is where I think a lot of people get frustrated maybe, and you have to be able to have the data to back this up and understand what you're looking at. Your first year, you go from an FTP of 200 to 250. Your second year is probably not going to go from 250 to 300, and then 300 to 350, and 350 to 4. It's not going to go in 50-watt increments. You might go 50 watts the first year, 25 watts the second year, right? I mean, depending on...
And I mean, there's other, you know, like, threshold power isn't everything either. You know, it's not, it doesn't tell the entire story. It's really nice to have a really good threshold power, and of course you want it to be as high as possible, but maybe 1 year your threshold dips by 5 watts, but your sprint improves by 200 watts. Like, it's not so, like, black and white, like, just if your FTP isn't improving, then you're not getting better. And you know, there's other factors too with bike racing, like learning how to race better. Like, you see some people with just freakishly large watts who just race, they don't race smart, and you know, they don't win races. It's like, well, how is that guy not winning? Just doesn't race well. And so I mean, maybe 1 year you don't improve your power that much, but you improve your race tactics a lot and you win more races. There's a lot.
Yeah, which is a huge part of it, right? I mean, being able to apply your motor in the proper times, because it's not a 5-minute race, right? So for most people, you're going to be racing 40 minutes to an hour in a crit, or 3 hours if it's a road race. And so, you know, that I find that really interesting. I was looking at some power stuff that Training Peaks put out about that weird guy. He won the world championship before Sagan. He was on Sky. I can't remember what his name was. Weird name.
Oh yeah, I know. I don't remember.
Anyway, they were showing his power, and they were like, "This is the power you need to do to win the world championship." And the last, I think, 10 minutes of that race, you know, was not an unachievable power number. Like, it was, I think he did 500 watts for like 6 minutes, which is, I mean, still, it's a lot. But that is, for someone who maybe doesn't understand watt to kilo, but that is an amateur level obtainable power goal. The difference is that he did it at the end of a 6-hour ride, right? And then they showed all of the surges that he did, and just the fact that, you know, his average watts for 6 hours was like 300 watts. Yeah. You know, not even normalized. Yeah. And so, you know, there is a difference between guys who can put out power at a short distance and then guys who can put out power when it counts, right? And I would say that I'm a good example of that, man. I've hit some decent power numbers, some really good power numbers, but when it comes into racing, I've never hit a PR in a race. It's always in training, right? And that's frustrating because it's like, if I could do what I do on the road in training in a race, but it just comes down to that final lap or that final sprint or that final bit where, man, you know, knowing how to race, knowing how to conserve.
Was it Kwiatkowski?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, where he broke away at the end. Yeah. And, you know, and then the other thing, man, is, you know, kind of get off the topic of training just a bit, is guys will watch this play out on Tour de France where they show this lead out, and it's like the guy who's 7th wheel wins the race. But if you've ever been to an amateur race, usually the guy 7th wheel gets 7th place, right? It's not really like that. You know, coming into a crit, that last turn, man, if you're not top 3,
a lot of time the guy who goes into the last turn first wins. You know, and it depends on the course, but because it doesn't work like what you see in the tour.
Yeah, no, I mean, because the thing is that those guys in tour are going 45 miles an hour. And so the draft is so much more significant versus in a crit where you're coming out of a turn at an amateur level and maybe you're 25, right? So the acceleration, there's so much acceleration there that I feel like you can't just sit in someone's wheel and wait for the very last bit. Where in the Tour de France, when you're just smoking with this huge group, you can maybe sit in the wheel a little more because of the draft. But I always find it's so much different when I'm in that final sprint and I'm opening it up and I'm on a guy's wheel, but I can't come around him because we're accelerating. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not just sitting there relaxing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so zones, okay? You hear that so much. Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4. What actual physical science is surrounding those zones? Like, what is happening when you move from Zone 1 to Zone 2, Zone 3 to Zone 4? What physiological changes are happening?
So first, let's kind of define the zones, I guess. Like, so Zone 1 is, recovery kind of pace, just easy piddling around. Zone 2 would be endurance pace. So basically Zone 2 is, you could if you were to eat, you could maintain that all day. You could maintain that pace for a very long period of time. Zone 3 is just a little bit below lactate threshold. Some people call it sweet spot, where you're definitely like producing some lactic acid, but you're not reaching that point of onset of blood lactate accumulation. So you're not seeing like a big spike in the accumulation of lactic acid. So basically, you're producing lactic acid, but not faster than your body is able to deal with that lactic acid, to get rid of it. And then Zone 4 is like threshold, so, and again, it's a range, so, like lower threshold and upper threshold, but basically that's the zone where you start to see that onset of blood lactate accumulation, so you can only maintain it for so long. If you're like on the bottom end of Zone 4, then probably about an hour you could maintain it. On the top end of it, you might only be able to maintain it for 20 minutes. Then you get to Zone 5, which is like super threshold, so well above lactate threshold. And then you could say Zone 6 too, which is like just kind of above that. It's like everything above that. So
well, when I was doing the VO2 max with you guys, it was really neat to see the graph, because there was like 2 lines of my, I don't know if it was blood lactate or oxygen, but there was a point where they intersected. So one was going down, one was going up, and then all of a sudden they crossed, and it was like, okay, this is your FTP right here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, where there's a point where at a certain level of watts, I now am not able to process as much oxygen as I need, or is like how?
Yeah. So what happens is you're so I'm trying to think of how to like kind of explain this without going into too much detail. But basically, what the mechanism of fatigue is your body's inability to produce the molecule ATP, adenosine triphosphate, fast enough. That's the molecule that when it's broken, it produces the energy that is required to create movement within the body. And so your body reformulates ATP over time, and it uses, in order to do that, it uses there's 3 different energy systems. There's aerobic, and then you have like lactic anaerobic, and then you have alactic anaerobic. I don't want to go too far into detail with that, but basically the mechanism of fatigue is your body's inability to produce ATP fast enough,
like you're using it faster
to provide the energy for the work that you're doing. So the lactic energy system, basically you use carbohydrates to create the energy to reformulate more ATP from it, when it's broken, it turns into adenosine diphosphate, and then it gets broken into ADP and a separate phosphate, and then you use energy to bind a new phosphate to make it ATP again, and then so it's using carbohydrates to do that, and in that process it's a anaerobic system, so it's not using oxygen, so that the byproduct of that is lactic acid. And so when you're working at a higher and higher work rate, you're producing more lactic acid. And so when you go, it's kind of I'm not doing a very good job explaining this right now because I'm trying to make it simple, but you go from a very aerobic state where you're using a lot of, you're basically relying on oxygen to produce that energy to make more ATP to pedal. And then but that system only works so fast. And then the lactic anaerobic system works a lot faster. You're able to produce a lot more ATP faster and more rapidly. And so when your work rate starts to increase, you make a transition from being primarily aerobic to primarily anaerobic, going to that lactic anaerobic system, and then the alactic anaerobic system is way higher intensity than that, even like sprint,
But so it makes the energy faster at that point, but just not sustainable.
Yeah, so it's producing energy faster, but you're getting an accumulation of lactic acid because you're not using oxygen to produce the ATP. So the byproduct is lactic acid, which then builds up, and you feel that burning sensation, and then your body, you get to a point where your body's like, no more, I can't. So you have a big accumulation.
So I heard you say something, and I'm going to assume people probably also picked up on that. You said that you use carbs, right, to do energy. So is like when you say your body's using carbohydrates, does that then mean I should only eat carbohydrates? Like, should I just load myself up with carbs and that's all I eat ever, and then I have tons of energy?
No, definitely. I mean, you need carbs, you need fats, you need protein, but carbs are definitely should be your primary macronutrient. I mean,
during, after?
For an athlete, yeah. I mean, basically everything you eat should be kind of balanced, and it should have some carbs and some protein and maybe a little bit of fat. During exercise, then you can just basically do straight sugar, because really you're depleting. By using those carbohydrates to produce energy, you're depleting your glycogen within your body. And so, you drink a Coke in the middle of a 5-hour ride, and you're introducing more sugar into the system, which can then be used to produce ATP, like I was talking about. But no, I mean, you need. So I mean, for an athlete, your diet should consist of maybe 65% carbohydrates, and that's based on, that percentage of your total caloric intake. And then for protein, you really don't need to be more than 20% of your diet doesn't need to be protein. And that goes for all athletes. And, a lot of people say weightlifters, they need to have 40% protein or something, whatever they need a lot more protein, but really they don't, because even they during exercise are depleting carbohydrates. They're not using protein to produce energy, unless, you can use protein to produce ATP, but it's very slow. It's a really slow process. You don't want to do that.
But that's what happens when you bonk, right?
Yeah. So you get a depletion of glycogen, and blood. Your blood sugar gets low, and then you start to rely on fat stores, which is very slow. Again, going back to the aerobic energy system. The aerobic energy system mostly uses fat to produce energy, and but it's very slow, like I was saying before. So your work rate diminishes, and then you can also use protein through a process called gluconeogenesis, which basically it tears down protein to turn it into it makes it like carbohydrates, and then it can be used, but it takes a long time. So when you start to feel like your cadence starts to get real slow and your power isn't as high, that's what's happening. You can't sustain that work rate because you don't have enough glycogen.
So this is something we kind of talked about when we were riding the other day. When you go into a zone and you want to try to make adaptations in that zone, say zone 4. If my zone 4 is a 45 watt window, am I getting the same benefits if I say my zone 4 is 295 to 345? If I do the workout at 300 watts times 5 minutes times 5 reps, am I going to get the same benefit if I did 300 watts versus 330? I'm still in zone 4, but I have this huge sway, and 330's hard as shit, right? 300 is not as hard. But if I'm in that same zone, what am I still making adaptations? Am I still making the same benefit just with less perceived effort?
That's a good question. Like, it depends then, like, on how long you're doing it for. So if you're saying, like, if it's a 5-minute interval and, 300 watts is, like, on the bottom end of your zone 4, then, you probably need to be doing a little bit higher of an intensity just because of the duration of the interval is shorter. But if you're doing a longer interval, then that 300 watts might be okay because you're not going to accumulate lactic acid as quickly that way. So if you're doing 300 watts for 20 minutes, then you're going to be accumulating lactic acid over more time. And so, the two different workouts would be making different, the physiological adaptations would be slightly different.
But it's in the same zone.
It's the adaptations are similar but a little bit different. At the lower intensity you're having to deal with the lactic acid while you're continuing to pedal, you're accumulating it and cycling it out at the same time. Whereas with the shorter interval, you're gonna just produce like a bucket load of lactic acid by the end, and then during the recovery interval, your body is then going to deal with that lactic acid before you start your next interval. So the physiological basis of the two workouts is a little bit different, but it's going to be both will have the effect of improving your threshold,
which is what you want. So without cookie cutter programs aren't that great because everyone's different, right? I mean, genetically everyone's different, but also everyone's just different in how hard they're going to be doing this. And so I don't want you to give out some kind of cookie cutter program, but to someone who is just starting out and they want to start kind of putting some structure in, give me like 3 workouts, like legitimate workouts, something that they could go and do today. 3 workouts for 3 different adaptations, like a more endurance, a high intensity, or an FTP. Like what perfect 3 workouts would you recommend someone be able to do?
Oh man, that's tough to just say. Because it's just, you periodize a program and you start where you're, maybe just doing like an all endurance stuff, and then you progress over time to, you start to do like kind of lower intensity threshold stuff for longer periods of time, and then you get to where you're peaking and you're doing like really neuromuscular power kind of stuff. And so, but to say,
just so someone like right now after this, listen, they could go out and do a workout to kind of get.
For sure, like a good workout always is to do like 10-minute intervals, at like lower half of zone 4, with 5-minute recoveries. You can do like 3 or 4 of those. It's always a solid workout.
If someone doesn't have power or heart rate, how do they know they're in zone 4?
They don't.
Yeah.
You just don't. Before you started using any sort of data, you were like, you thought that you had a good idea of kind of what zone you were in or whatever, and then you're like, dude, it's completely not what I expected once you started using heart rate. And then
Well, because you were telling me before I had any data, you said hold a perceived exertion of, 15 out of 20.
Yeah.
And I mean, or sometimes you would say go 18 out of 20. And you try to do that, but you're just like so maxed out or so under where you are. And I've used this analogy of, if you walked into a gym, like where you're going to lift weights and there was no numbers on the weights, right? I mean, you're not going to be able to expect great results, and you're going to probably end up having a 45 on one arm and a 35 on the other, and you're going to have no way to really gauge progression other than just this feel, which isn't,
not a good. I mean, some days you might have a perceived exertion of, and so when you use the scale of 20, it's like the Borg scale of rating of perceived exertion, which is a 6 to 20 scale. So, some days you might have a rating of perceived exertion of, 10 and be doing, threshold power. It's like, wow, I feel amazing today. And then other days you might have perceived exertion of 18 and be doing zone 2. It just depends on fatigue and, everything. It just depends on so many things. And so, if you don't have heart rate or power, the next best thing is to do rating of perceived exertion. But it's not accurate.
And so now you were talking about periodization, and obviously this is what you do for a living, so you don't want to, it's hard to give this kind of advice just blanket. But your progression of periodization, does it go strength, like in the gym, then lower intensity workouts for 3 to 4 weeks, and then just slowly every 3 to 4, 6, 8 weeks, whatever it is, slowly ramp up the intensity and drop off the duration? Or
so you have there's like 3 components of periodization. You have microcycles, mesocycles, and macrocycles. And so a macrocycle is your entire training year, and then a mesocycle is like one block, like a month, and then a microcycle is a week. And so you break down the periodization into those 3 components. And so, if you're talking about the macro cycle, then we get to the end of the racing season, take a little bit of time off, and then we start to periodize again towards the next season. And we start off with some strength training and some stuff in the gym and some strength work on the bike. And then we move from that to, like I said earlier, kind of like lower threshold level stuff. And then, start to ramp up the intensity. And then as you get, and cycling is such a crazy sport because we race so many times. Like if you have triathletes where they only have a couple races in a year, and if they are separated by a few months, then you can really peak for each event. And so in cycling, you kind of, you race so many times that you have to kind of choose certain events or like certain times during the year at which you want to peak. And then, so you ramp up the intensity, and then you start to decrease the volume as you get closer to that event, and then really have like that peak intensity with low volume just before your peak time, where you try to keep the highest level of fitness possible while reducing fatigue as much as possible. Which is,
that's like a taper week, right?
Yeah. And when you have a long training period before you taper, you have a few weeks of tapering.
So for someone who is time crunched, I got this comment, and someone said they were looking at the Cyclist Trainings Bible or something like that, and in that book they talk a lot about long slow distance, LSD. Mm-hmm. And he's just like, I don't have the time to do that. I don't have the time to go out and do 4 to 5 hour rides. So for someone who doesn't have that and can't really put in these huge blocks of time, do you then just shift to all high intensity, 30 minutes of eye-splitting pace? Or, how, if you only had, say, 3 hours in the week, which is, obviously you can't expect much from that. But if you only had 3 or 4 hours, do you shift it evenly around to try to do endurance and high intensity? Or do you just 1 4-hour ride or 5 30-minute rides?
Personally, I would probably break it up. If you are only training 3 hours in the week, then you're not going to have much hope of being a very successful like road racer. Like do 4-hour races, you're just not getting the duration of riding and that requires. So I would probably say, keep it to, crits and circuit races for that person maybe, and or if they're just focusing on general cycling fitness but I mean, again, then we go back to it depends. It depends on what their goal is. So if they want to be a legit road racer, then for sure you need to have those longer rides. And so maybe one week you would have a few shorter rides, and then the next week have one longer ride.
But so someone who doesn't even race, someone who just is Mr. Smith, wants to lose weight, be kind of fit.
In that case, I would say split it up to if you have 3 hours, then do 3 1-hour sessions and do.
At what kind of intensity?
And do intervals during those sessions, and I mean you can mix it up, so not have every training session be the same intensity, but and then I mean even with that you can still periodize it to some extent, where you start out. I mean because fitness is always a building process, and so yeah, I mean you can still kind of start out with a little bit of strength work and then work your way up to getting into the higher intensity, and then kind of go back and work on the basics again, and then build again, and over time you kind of see like a stair-stepping progress.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, and then we'll tell people how to find you. How quickly do you lose fitness? And I know you're going to say it depends, but when you have, I mean, how much goes into sustaining fitness? If I am a Cat 2 in 2016 and I 350 watt FTP or 350 watts for 20 minutes, so it was like a 336 FTP, and I don't do really anything in 2017, do I lose everything I've done for the last 5 years? Like, how quickly do I just completely start from ground zero, or is that even a thing?
Yeah, I mean, you can go pretty close to back to pre-trained state, but you'll maintain a lot of the adaptations that do occur to an extent. But I mean, of course, you won't keep them at the level that they were at when you were at your best, but you won't go back to your worst either. So if you've become fit, then you'll never be as unfit as if you were never fit before. Unless, I mean, it would take a really long time. So in 2017, if you didn't do anything, you would lose a lot, but you wouldn't lose all of it. And then also...
So if I didn't do much in 2017, my life's hectic, and I come back in 2018, even though I've lost a lot measurably, will I gain that back at a quicker rate than I did to gain it in the first place?
Well, that was exactly what I was going to move into. It's really interesting is that when you become fit, your DNA actually changes. You learn how to become fit, and so you like encode that in your DNA. So if you get detrained and then you start to train again, your body remembers how to get fit, and so it happens quicker. It remembers how to assemble the proteins that are required for hypertrophy and like all those things. It remembers how to become fit. So yeah, when you start to train again, it happens quicker. And so that's a lot of people who are listening might kind of know that. They might have gotten detrained for a little bit and gotten back to it and been like, wow, that came back pretty quick, and that's also why like in the early off season you can take some time off and you don't need to worry too much about it, because you're not going to just lose everything. You get it back pretty quick, and then you might even go further than where you were before.
Okay, it's the last question. How is it possible that I am a human and Chris Froome is a human, yet we are so far, like the discrepancy between what we can do with our human body is so vast, right? I mean, the spectrum of the worst cyclist to the best cyclist is unbelievable. Like, why is there such a difference in the ability? I mean, there's a lot of people that will say to them, it is unbelievable that you could hold 20 miles an hour, right? That's just, they can't even fathom it. When I first got into riding, I was looking at a form and some guy said, yeah, my average 1 hour ride is 20 miles an hour. That's with stop signs. And I was like, you have to be doping. There's no way you're lying. That can't be possible. And then you realize, oh, that's possible. Oh, and that's actually slow. Right? And so how, like, what is the science between having this discrepancy that is just so massive? And when you train so hard and you're giving everything you have and you go to the race and you just get blown away, it's like, how are they so much better? And then those guys get blown away, and then the guys that are blowing those guys away get blown away. I mean, is there an answer to that?
I mean, I think of course, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but I mean, we kind of touched on it before. It's largely genetics. You know, some people are just gifted with, you know, they chose the right parents. You know, they were gifted with certain abilities, or you know, certain like their physiology is different, and it's more. And so it's kind of like what I was saying before. Like if we could, you know, do like a muscle biopsy when we're a baby and see like, okay, this is kind of, and just, I mean, it's even more than just a muscle biopsy. It's just, there's so many things that go into it. But if we could like look at all those things as a baby and be like, this baby would be perfect for swimming or perfect for cycling or whatever, you know, and then start training them for that at a young age, then I mean, that's, you know, that would be. And I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that, because then it doesn't allow the kid to kind of find what they love doing. Because for me, I mean, maybe I was built to be a swimmer, you know, for sure am, but I'm not a good swimmer. I'm a terrible swimmer. Never got into it. And, but I mean, I love being on two wheels. I love dirt bikes. I love bicycles. And so even though I'm not Chris Froome, that's okay, because I enjoy it. So I don't necessarily think, I don't wish that we could figure out as a baby and then specialize from a young age, but I mean, but some, like I was saying earlier, you know, some people just are gifted genetically and they then get placed in the right sport and they become special.
Do you think that Chris Froome is possibly the upper limit of human potential physically?
I mean, it's impossible to say. I mean, because we think those things, like, I mean, it's kind of a separate but kind of like tangential idea, is like looking at the evolution of motocross. Like in 1990, it's like backflip isn't possible. Like, they've done a triple backflip. They're doing front flips. They're doing all kinds of crazy things. Like you have these the evolution of sport that's just like these things aren't possible, and then they are, you know.
Well, but you also start to, I mean, that's a little bit different because that's kind of more like technique or skill versus just raw fitness, where you start to see like sprinters, just like a 100-meter sprinter, you know, there seems to be this wall of like 9.77 or something is just, without doping, might not be possible. And you have Usain Bolt, who's just genetically gifted. The guy has strides, you know, as a giraffe. And it's like that guy, unfortunately for everyone else, he can put the same amount of work in. He's going to travel more distance with the same amount of energy. But so without having some freak of nature like Peter Sagan, where it's just this guy's like a test tube lab and somehow he defies all odds. But you know, you got to imagine that Chris Froome is everyone everyone in the world tries to beat him, and for the most part, there are times where it's just like he's unbeatable.
Well, you're right. Like, you know, the motocross example. Like I said, it's separate, but it's kind of tangential. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of more skill based, and then we're talking about human like physical capacity. But I mean, it's just the point I was trying to make is just that I don't think it's possible to really say, because I mean, you might have Chris Froome. I mean, you know, evolution is a thing. Like, we evolve as a species, and so you know, you might have somebody like Chris Froome, you know, have babies with somebody who is equally freakish female, and then they create babies that are more freakish than he is, you know. So I don't know. I mean, possibly there could be further evolution to allow the limits to be pushed beyond what we currently even think is possible.
Well, do you think that also the science is catching up to that, where 50 years ago they said smoke a cigarette and eat a raw steak and you'll be fast, and then you sort of start to realize maybe that's not necessarily the case, and then you start to uncover more and more things about how to squeeze every little bit of performance out. But then that tapers off, right? So it's a what's the reverse of an exponential gain, right? Like that's kind of how fitness is. It sort of tapers off the other way. You get all these gains in the first bit, and then it just slowly tapers off to where, at Chris Froome's level, this guy has to train out of his mind. He has to have the perfect pello just to sustain his fitness, not gain fitness, right? Just to sustain fitness. We got to wrap this up. I got to have one more question because people are going to talk shit if I don't. What is your take on veganism as someone who knows the science of the body? Is that, what's your take? Is that if done right, good?
If done right, yeah. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with it. It's tough to be vegan and get all of the nutrients that are required, and especially getting all of the essential amino acids, proteins, and then like vitamin B and iron. Those can become issues. But I mean, like yourself, you do a really good job with it, and it's a major part of your lifestyle. I mean, it has to be such a big part of your lifestyle, and so like for a lot of people who are really on the go a lot and don't have time to prepare every meal throughout the day, it might be a little bit tougher. But I mean, it's possible. It's totally doable, and it's totally feasible.
But so people would ask, is it a performance enhancer or is it a performance decliner, right? Ryan Moore, I had him on, he was saying, I'm not an elite cyclist despite of my veganism. I am an elite cyclist because of my veganism. And I feel the same way. I feel that I'm probably a mid-pack Cat 3 without proper nutrition, but with proper nutrition is kind of an open-ended thing, but with veganism, I feel that it is a performance enhancement. And so, but that could be both ways, right? If done wrong, you're not going to be getting adaptations.
Yeah, if it's done wrong, then you're going to have negative effects of it. But
you can have positive effects.
For sure. I am a believer in largely plant-based nutrition, at least. Plants are great sources of carbohydrates and the nutrients that we need for proper bodily function, and so if we're not consuming a lot of plants, I don't think, you're not going to get the nutrition that you need, and you can get the nutrition that you need with a plant-based diet, without consuming animal products, but it's easier to get all the essential amino acids and stuff. A lot of people really believe in chocolate milk for recovery, and that's because you have the simple carbohydrates as well as a full complete amino acid profile, which that's what you get with animal products. It's a lot easier to get the full proteins, and so
it's easier because it's more widely accepted. I think that if our society changed a little bit, offered more plant-based stuff, which I think we're getting there, right?
With plant-based, you just have to eat more foods. You have to eat. Whereas with you can just have milk and you get all of the amino acids. Whereas with plants, you need to eat a couple of different foods to get all of the essential amino acids. So that's why it's easier. You can just go to this one go-to thing and get all of those. So I'm not saying one way or the other is necessarily better, but I believe I try to be largely plant-based myself, and I'm not vegan personally, but largely plant-based because it is important. And
I think it's hard to argue that plants aren't good for you, right? But the thing is like, and I'm gonna get on my soapbox just for a minute, which is, when people say it's the easier thing to do, it's like, yeah, I totally get that, but there's also something to be said about not doing the easiest thing and contributing to a larger picture of that you are helping out more than just your physical form. And I am all for performance. I love performance. I want my body to be the best. But to also be able to say, like, I don't have to contribute to the fucked up industry, which is factory farming. That helps me just mentally, right? And your mind is such a powerful thing, which is so crazy. You could have the best motor in the world, but if you just don't have the right mindset, if you have too much stress in your life or whatever, your mind's not clicking, you're not gonna be able to use that motor. And I'm not saying that maybe a person listening would completely be able to access their motor after going vegan because of the mental side, but for me, it's there's just a lot of benefits all around that are outside of performance, and I don't 100% look at it as, because I think if you looked at it 100% scientifically, performance-wise, chocolate milk might land on good, right? Might land on this is probably the better way for you to go. But I feel like I drink my Cranked natural protein hemp powder, and I love it, and it's a little bit more difficult. But the benefits that I get from that, outside of that, it doesn't hinder my performance, but it,
Well, you and I have had long conversations about this, and I think that what we both agree on is that if everybody just makes the attempt to include more plant-based stuff in their diet and, does make that effort, even if they're if at one point they were 50% plant-based and they become 70% plant-based and then eventually 80%, if they do, make that effort, I think that you still, you do have that all around, it is better all around, like what, all those things that you were saying, it is a good thing. And, you don't necessarily need to be 100% vegan, but kind of make that attempt to be more plant-based, and it is probably better for your body and maybe your mind as well.
For sure. Well, you're awesome. So I often don't talk a lot about training on my channel. I do like basic stuff, but because I don't have the expertise that you do, and I don't want to willy-nilly tell someone, hey, go do this workout, or this is the best way to do it, because it all depends, and I don't have the 10 plus years of schooling you do. So if you want more about training, if you want to hear more and know more about the actual science, you need to follow Tony Wolf. And so he's got his coaching company, ATP Coaching, which is funny because we were talking about ATP. What is ATP again? The molecule that...
Adenosine triphosphate.
So look up Instagram, ATP Coaching, Facebook, ATP Coaching. I will link them all in the description. And look, if you want to take it serious, this guy's going to make you an awesome program. But one thing is that when you go into a program, I feel like you have to be committed. And so if someone gets a schedule and they complete 20% of it, they're not going to get the benefits that you've worked into that. And so, to spend the money, to make the investment, just like a power meter, a training program is a tool, and it's how you use that tool to gauge what, benefits you're going to get from it. Don't use the tool, no benefits. So, is a training program for everyone? I don't know, probably not. But for someone who wants to squeeze out those marginal gains, for someone who wants to go from a plateau of I've been riding for 15 years and I've not gotten any better, do something different. And literally just the fact of having a coach there where you are accountable, you see my training peaks. So I know that when you schedule me a training program or a training day and I don't do it, it's like, you saw that, right? So I want to, whatever little pieces of motivation I want to get out there, I want to make sure my training peaks is green, which it's never. It's red across the board. Anyway, follow Tony Wolf, ATP Coaching. He's going to do, on Instagram, he did a story where he talked all through one of his 4-hour rides, talked about why he was doing it, how he was doing it, what his thoughts were. So if you like the crit breakdowns that I do, I think that you would really dig Tony's breakdowns of his training programs. And we'll have a lot more of Tony on this channel talking about training. So anything else to add?
Not here. I don't think so.
All right, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Thank you so much, guys. As always, Vegan Cyclist. Yeah.
Lead the pack, thinking abstract, never backtrack. I was sweating bottom, talking down, but I'm past that. Days off, throw the pay off, can't have that. Before we get to work, show me where the bag at. Get my hands dirty any way I have to make it. Plotting on the next move in the crib, pacing. Said I found a way to get the fuck up out the basement. I know these rappers talk a whole lot, but never